The airlock door hissed shut behind her, and for one suspended heartbeat, Zara Veltash believed she might actually die that night. Not from exile, not from the cold vacuum of space, but from the look in her father's eyes as the council stripped her of everything she had ever been. She would remember that look for the rest of her life. On the world of Zeta Prime, daughters did not refuse. They did not speak in council chambers reserved for men. They did not stand before the most powerful merchant lord in the eastern provinces and say, calmly, clearly, no. But Zara had. The ceremony hall had gone silent when she said it. 300 guests, draped in silk-dyed the deep violet of nobility, froze mid-breath. Krell Ashdor, 50 years her senior, his wealth measured in entire star systems, his cruelty measured in the wives who had vanished from public life one by one, had simply blinked as if the word itself were a foreign language he did not recognize. Say that again, he had said, his voice soft in the way a blade is soft before it cuts. I will not marry you, Zara repeated. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. Not for my father's debts, not for my family's standing, not for anything you can offer or threaten. Her father had not even looked at her after that. He simply turned to the council elders and nodded, as though confirming a transaction rather than condemning his own daughter. Within the hour, Zara's citizenship chip was burned from her wrist. Within 2 hours, she was marched through the public square so the entire city could witness what defiance earned as a Pyrrhian woman. Humiliation, erasure, exile. The crowd did not cheer, but they did not protest either. Fear had long ago taught them silence. She expected to be dropped at a transport station and left to find her own way into the void, forgotten. She did not expect Krell's mercenaries. They came for her 3 hours after the exile was finalized, while she sat shivering in a transit dock with nothing but the clothes on her back and a half-empty water ration. For men in unmarked armor, their faces hidden behind dark visors, dragged her without a word of explanation. She fought. She would always fight. That much her mother had taught her in secret, in whispered lessons about self-respect that Zara had never been allowed to use until now. But for armed men against one unarmed woman was no contest at all. When she woke, she was no longer on Zeta Prime. She was lying on a frigid metal floor in a place that smelled of rust and dead machinery, lit only by the weak emergency glow of a single failing light strip. The air tasted thin and stale, scraping her throat with every breath. A mining platform, abandoned, by the look of the corroded equipment and skeletal support struts visible through cracked viewports. The Tartarus Belt. She realized with rising horror, recognizing the asteroid silhouettes tumbling past the viewport glass. The most dangerous, least charted debris field in the sector. A place ships avoided. A place no one would think to search. This was not exile. This was execution, dressed up as mercy. Zara forced herself upright, her limbs heavy and clumsy in the platform's failing artificial gravity. A note had been left for her, scrawled across a cracked data tablet bolted to the wall. Krell Ashdor does not forgive insults. Consider this your wedding gift. She laughed. A broken, hollow sound that echoed to the dead corridors. Of course, even in death, he wanted her to know it was punishment for daring to choose herself. The oxygen reserves, when she found the platform's failing life support console, told her she had perhaps 18 hours before the air ran out completely. No rescue beacon, no working communications array, no way to call for help, and even if she could, who would answer a distress call from a disgraced, citizenship-less woman drifting in the most lethal asteroid field in the galaxy? She searched the platform anyway, because giving up had never been in her nature, whatever her father had tried to beat out of her. In a maintenance closet 3 levels down, behind a wall of rusted pipes, she found an ancient short-range distress transmitter, military surplus, decades old, abandoned by whoever had once worked this dying outpost. Her hand shook as she spliced the wiring with nothing but a multi-tool in desperate hope, sending out a weak, stuttering signal into the dark. She had no idea if anyone would ever hear it. She had no idea that, 11 hours later, a battered cargo freighter called the Iron Resolve would pick up that faint, dying pulse on its long-range sensors, and that its captain, a man who spent years trying to outrun his own ghost, would refuse to let it go unanswered. For now, Zara simply sat in the dark, wrapped her arms around herself against the deepening cold, and waited to find out whether the universe had any mercy left for a woman who had only ever wanted to choose her own life. The platform groaned around her, metal contracting in the deep cold of space. Somewhere beyond the cracked viewport, the asteroids of Tartarus drifted on in their ancient, indifferent orbits, utterly unconcerned with the fragile human life flickering out within the wreckage below. 18 hours, maybe less. She closed her eyes and, for the first time since the council chamber, allowed herself to cry, not from fear, but from a strange, fierce pride. Whatever happened next, whatever the void had in store for her, she had chosen this. She had chosen herself. And somewhere out in the dark, unbeknownst to her, that choice was about to collide with the one ship in the galaxy whose captain believed no one should ever be left die alone. The signal was barely a whisper against the static. Aboard the Iron Resolve, Lieutenant Sasha Okafor, Call Signhawk, the ship's sharp-eyed center officer, nearly dismissed it as background noise from the asteroid field's mineral interference. But something in the rhythm caught her attention. Too regular, too deliberate to be natural. A pattern, a heartbeat of intention buried in the chaos. "Captain," she called across the bridge, "I'm picking up an old distress signal. Tartarus Belt, Sector 9. It's weak, really weak, but it's there." Captain Marcus Chen looked up from the cracked data display, where he'd been reviewing cargo manifests, the dull fluorescent light of the bridge throwing shadows across the scar that ran along his jaw, a souvenir from a war he rarely spoke about, and a life he'd left behind in pursuit of something quieter, something that still let him sleep at night. "Tartarus," he repeated. "That's a graveyard, not a shipping lane. No one goes in there voluntarily." "That's exactly why it caught my attention," Sasha said. "Whoever sent it either doesn't know any better or didn't have a choice." Marcus felt the old, familiar pull in his chest, the one that had ended his military career and started this new, harder life as a freight captain skirting the edges of lawful space. He had sworn, after Velcara Station, after watching Command leave 80 civilians to die because rescuing them wasn't strategically viable, that he would never again be the kind of man who calculated the cost of a life before deciding whether it was worth saving. "Change course," he said. "We're going in." His first officer, a grizzled former smuggler named Dex Oconquerez, groaned audibly from the pilot's seat. "Cap, that field's eaten ships twice our size for breakfast. We don't even know what's out there. Could be a trap, could be pirates using a fake signal to lure in good Samaritans. Could be," Marcus agreed, "or it could be someone who's about to run out of air. I'm not willing to bet a life on could be." Dex sighed the long-suffering sigh of a man who had followed Marcus into far worse decisions than this one, and adjusted the Iron Resolve's heading toward the swirling debris field. Navigating Tartarus was an act of controlled terror. The belt was a chaotic storm of ice, rock, and twisted metal, the remains of a long-dead mining operation that had collapsed under its own ambition decades ago. Dex threaded the freighter between tumbling boulders the size of small moons, his hands steady despite the sweat beading on his brow, while Sasha called out trajectory adjustments in a clipped, urgent rhythm. It took nearly 2 hours of nerve-shredding navigation before the source of the signal came into view, a derelict mining platform, half-crumpled and venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches, clinging to a slow, decaying orbit around a massive asteroid. "Life signs?" Marcus asked. Sasha's fingers flew across her console. "1. Faint, but there. Whoever it is, they're running out of time. Dex, get us alongside that platform. Sasha, suit up, you're with me." The docking was rough. The platform's structural integrity too compromised to allow a clean seal, forcing Marcus and Sasha to cut through a collapsed section of corridor using a portable plasma torch, while their suits' oxygen timers ticked down in unforgiving red numbers. Every minute mattered. Every second was a gamble against a structure that could finish collapsing at any moment. They found Zara curled in the maintenance closet where she'd built her makeshift transmitter, her lips tinged blue, her breathing shallow and labored from oxygen deprivation. She was barely conscious, but when Marcus knelt beside her and gently lifted his visor enough for her to see his face, her eyes snapped open with a flash of pure, defiant fear, the look of someone who expected violence from every stranger who found her. "I'm not here to hurt you," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even, the same tone he'd once used to calm panicked soldiers in the worst moments of his life. "My name's Marcus. We picked up your signal. We're getting you out of here." Zara tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a rasp. Sasha was already moving, fitting an emergency oxygen mask over her face, murmuring reassurances as the freighter's medical scanner confirmed what they already feared. Severe hypoxia, dangerously low core temperature, but alive. Alive, and with time still to spare. Getting her back to a collapsing corridor was its own desperate scramble, the platform groaning and shedding debris as if it sensed it had been cheated of its prize. They made it back aboard the Iron Resolve with barely minutes to spare before support strut finally gave way entirely, sending an entire section of the mining platform spiraling silently into the dark. In the ship's small medical bay, as automated systems stabilized Zara's vitals and color slowly returned to her face, Marcus stood at the foot of her cot, arms crossed, studying the citizenship burn scar on her wrist, the unmistakable mark of a Zephyrian exile. "She's a long way from home," Dex observed quietly from the doorway, and from the look of that mark, home didn't exactly want her back. "No," Marcus agreed. "Someone wanted her dead instead." He thought of Velcara Station, of every civilian he hadn't been allowed to save, of every order he'd followed instead of the one thing his conscience had screamed at him to do. Not this time. Whoever did this to her, Marcus said, is going to have to go through us to finish the job. He didn't yet know how true those words would become, or how far across the galaxy to fight to protect one exiled woman would eventually carry his crew, his ship, and everything he believed about what one person could do when they refused to look away. Zara woke to unfamiliar warmth. For a long, disoriented moment, she simply lay still, staring at the low metal ceiling above her, tried to convince herself this was not some final hallucination before death finally claimed her. The hum of working engines vibrated faintly through the cot beneath her. The air, when she breathed it in, tasted clean and recycled rather than stale and dying. She was alive. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she had to fight back tears she refused to let strangers see. A woman with close-cropped hair and kind, sharp eyes was seated nearby, monitoring a medical display. She noticed Zara stir and smiled gently. "Hey there. Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare." "Where?" Zara's voice cracked and used after so many hours of silence and oxygen deprivation. "Where am I?" "You're aboard the Iron Resolve," the woman said. "I'm Sasha. We picked up your distress signal out in the Tartarus Belt. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign in Zara's mouth, almost meaningless. She had spent her entire life being told what safety meant. Obedience, silence, compliance. And none of it had ever actually protected her from anything. She studied Sasha's face carefully, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, the price that would inevitably come due. "Why?" Zara finally asked. "Why would you risk your ship for a stranger?" Sasha's expression softened, though something harder flickered briefly beneath it. "Because the captain doesn't believe in leaving people to die when he has the power to stop it. Believe me, I used to think that kind of idealism would get him killed someday. Turns out it just makes the rest of us better people for following him." Before Zara could process that strange answer, the cabin door slid open, and the man from the platform, Marcus, she remembered, stepped inside, a tray of simple food and water in his hands. He set it on the small table beside her cot, without ceremony. "You should eat something when you're ready," he said. "Nothing fancy. Just enough to get your strength back." Zara eyed the food with deep suspicion, an old, hard-learned instinct. "What do you want to exchange?" Something flickered across Marcus's face, not offense, but kind of weary recognition, as though he understood exactly why she'd ask such a question. "Nothing," he said simply. "You don't owe me anything. We found you. We helped. That's the whole transaction." "That's not how the universe works," Zara said quietly. "Everything has a price." "Maybe where you're from," Marcus said. "Not on my ship." He left her then, giving her space rather than pushing for answers she clearly wasn't ready to share, and Zara found herself staring at the closed door for a long time afterward, turning his words over and over, trying to find a lie buried inside them. She didn't find one. That frightened her more than any threat could have. Over the following days, as her strength slowly returned, Zara began cautiously exploring the ship and its small crew. There was Dex, gruff and sarcastic, but unfailingly gentle whenever he thought no one was watching. There was Sasha, sharp-tongued and fiercely protective, who had apparently joined Marcus's crew after he'd refused to abandon her during some long-ago conflict neither of them discussed in detail. There was Tomas, the ship's young engineer, barely older than Zara herself, who treated her with an easy, unguarded friendliness that she found both comforting and deeply confusing. None of them treated her the way she expected. None of them demanded anything from her. No obedience, no gratitude performances, no subtle reminders of the debt she supposedly owed for her own rescue. It was Marcus, though, who unsettled her most, not because he was cruel, but because he wasn't. She kept waiting for the mask to slip, for the kindness to reveal itself as calculation. It never did. One evening, she found him alone on the observation deck, staring out at the slow drift of stars, his expression distant and heavy in a way that made him look, for a brief moment, achingly human. "You're thinking about something painful," she said before she could stop herself. Marcus didn't turn immediately. Old memories. A place called Valkyra Station. I was a soldier once. We had orders to evacuate a research outpost during an attack, but command decided the civilians weren't worth the resource cost of a full extraction. I argued. I lost. 83 people died because someone decided their lives weren't strategically valuable enough to save. Zara felt something tighten in her chest. "That's why you came for me. In Tartarus." "That's why I'll always come," Marcus said simply. "I may have promised to myself after Valkyra. Never again. Never anyone left behind, not while I have breath in my lungs in a ship that can fly." For the first time since her exile, Zara allowed herself to truly look at the strange, quietly determined man. Not as a captor, not as a stranger with hidden motives, but as someone whose entire life had been reshaped by the same refusal to look away from injustice that had cost her everything back home. "On Zaper," she said softly, "women who refuse are erased, made examples of. I always believed I would die for that choice eventually. I never imagined dying might lead me somewhere like this instead." Marcus finally turned to look at her, something steady and warm in his gaze. "You didn't just survive, Zara. You chose yourself, against everything telling you not to. That kind of courage doesn't disappear just because you're safe now. If anything, it's just getting started." Neither of them could have known, in that quiet moment beneath the stars, just how true those words would become, or how the bounty already gathering on Zara's head was about to turn the Iron Resolve into the most hunted ship in the sector. The first sign of trouble arrived 3 days later, in the form of an encrypted comm burst that made Dex go pale at the pilot's console. "Captain," he said, voice tight, "you need to see this." Marcus crossed the bridge in 3 quick strides, leaning over the display as Dex pulled up the intercepted transmission, a bounty notice, broadcast across half the sector's criminal networks, offering an obscene sum of credits to the safe, or, the fine print clarified, not necessarily safe. Return of one Zarvel Tash, exiled citizen of Zaper Prime. "Krell," Marcus said grimly, "he's not just hunting her himself anymore. He's outsourced it to every pirate, bounty hunter, and desperate mercenary in known space." Sasha leaned in to read the figure attached to the bounty and let out a low whistle. "That's not a ransom. That's a small fortune. He wants her badly. He wants to make an example," Marcus corrected. "A woman who refused him, who escaped him. If word spreads that she got away clean, it undermines everything his power is built on. He can't let that stand." When they told Zara, she absorbed the news with a calm that unsettled even Marcus, her jaw tightening but her voice steady. "I expected this. I should have known he wouldn't simply let me disappear. This isn't your fault," Marcus said firmly. "None of this is because of anything you did wrong. It's because you dared to exist outside the box he tried to put you in. Tell that to every mercenary now hunting your ship because of me," Zara said bitterly. "I won't be responsible for getting your crew killed over my choices." "You're not responsible for what we choose either," Marcus said, "and we choose to protect you. That's not a debt you're incurring. It's a decision we're making with full knowledge of the risk." The first attack came 2 days later. While the Iron Resolve was navigating a routine supply route, to the half-ton corridor. 3 unmarked fighters dropped out of stealth formation, weapons already charged, clearly expecting an easy kill against an unarmed cargo freighter. They had not accounted for Dex's reflexes, honed across a decade of outrunning law enforcement in his smuggling days, or for the freighter's surprisingly capable defensive systems, a holdover, Marcus admitted later, from a previous owner who'd valued survival over legality, braced for evasive maneuvers. Dex shouted, throwing the ship into a spiraling dive that sent 2 of the fighters' opening shots screaming harmlessly past the hull. Sasha was already at the gunnery station, returning fire with controlled, efficient bursts that clipped one fighter's wing and sent it spinning off course. Marcus, meanwhile, found Zara bracing herself in the corridor outside the bridge, her face pale, but her expression fierce rather than frightened. "Get to the escape pod," he ordered. "No," Zara said, with the same flat, unshakable defiance she'd once used to refuse an entire ruling council. "If this is happening because of me, I'm not going to hide while your crew fights for my life. Give me something useful to do." Marcus hesitated only a moment before tossing her a sidearm from the emergency locker. "Cover the lower corridor. If anyone breaches the hull, you make sure they regret it." It was, perhaps, an unconventional way to build trust, handing a weapon to a woman he'd known less than a week, but something in her eyes told him she had earned exactly that much faith already. The battle lasted less than 10 brutal minutes, but it felt far longer. By the time it ended, 2 of the 3 attacking fighters had been disabled or destroyed, and the third had fled rather than risk further losses. The Iron Resolve had sustained damage, a cracked hull plate, a fried secondary thruster, but no casualties. In the aftermath, as Tomas assessed the damage and Dex finally allowed himself to breathe again, Marcus found Zara sitting alone in the corridor, the borrowed sidearm still clutched loosely in her hands, staring at nothing. "First time holding a weapon?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. "First time anyone trusted me to hold one," Zara said quietly. "On Zaper, women aren't taught to defend themselves. We're taught to be defended, which really just means controlled, by whoever claims the right to protect us." "That's not protection," Marcus said. "That's a cage with better marketing." Zara managed a small, tired laugh, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her since the rescue. "You have a gift for making terrifying situations sound almost bearable, Captain Chen." "It's a survival skill," Marcus said. "Comes with the job." But even as the moment passed, Marcus knew the danger was far from over. A bounty of that size wouldn't stop after one failed attempt. If anything, the failure would only draw more dangerous hunters, eager to succeed where others had failed. They needed allies. They needed information. And somewhere out in the depths of contested space, Marcus suspected, they were about to uncover something far larger than one exile woman's flight from an arranged marriage, a system of corruption and exploitation that stretched across entire star systems, one that Zara's defiance had only just begun to expose. The trail began unexpectedly, with a name Zara recognized from her childhood. Selena Okonkwo, a woman who had vanished from Zapirian high society nearly 15 years earlier under circumstances officially recorded as voluntary withdrawal, but which Zara's mother had once whispered about with fear that had stayed with her ever since. "She refused a marriage, too," Zara explained to Marcus and the crew as they gathered around the ship's small briefing table. "Officially, she chose to leave society and live in seclusion. Unofficially, I always suspected something worse happened to her." Marcus exchanged a glance with Sasha. If she's still alive, and still out there somewhere, she might know things about how Krell and men like him operate. Might know how deep this actually goes. Tracking down Celine took nearly 2 weeks of careful, cautious investigation. Quiet inquiries in backwater stations, favors called in from old military contacts, bribes paid information brokers who specialized in secrets the powerful preferred buried. What they eventually uncovered chilled even Marcus's battle-hardened crew. Celine was alive, living under a different name on a remote agricultural colony at the edge of charted space. And she was not alone. Dozens, possibly hundreds, of women across multiple systems had similarly vanished from Zapirian society after refusing arranged marriages or defying male family members, all officially recorded as voluntary departures, suicides, or unfortunate accidents. The truth, once Celine finally agreed to meet with them and trusted Zara enough to speak openly, was far darker. An organized network of wealthy merchants, corrupt officials, and complicit enforcers who quietly disappeared troublesome women rather than allow public defiance to threaten the foundations of Zephyrian patriarchal control. Some were killed outright. Others were sold into forced labor or worse on lawless fringe worlds, far from any system that might intervene on their behalf. A small few, like Celine, managed to escape and disappear entirely, living in permanent hiding rather than risk exposure. Krell isn't just one cruel man, Celine told him, her voice hollow with old trauma. He's a node in a much larger system. Powerful men across dozens of worlds rely on this network to maintain control, to make sure women understand that defiance has consequences far worse than simple punishment. Your survival, Zara, your continued freedom. It's a crack in a foundation they spend generations building. Zara felt something shift inside her as she absorbed this revelation. Grief for the countless women who had suffered in silence, but also a fierce, rising anger that burned away the last of her fear. Then we expose it, she said. All of it. Every name, every connection, every hidden grave. That's not a small fight, Marcus warned. Expose a network like this, and you're not just facing one merchant's bounty anymore. You're facing everyone who benefits from the system staying hidden. I'm already being hunted across the galaxy for refusing one marriage, Zara said. I'd rather be hunted for something that actually matters. It was Sasha, surprisingly, who voiced the crew's collective resolve. Captain, I didn't sign on to this ship to smuggle cargo and dodge tax inspector forever. If there's a chance to actually do something that matters, something that helps people who never had anyone willing to fight for them, I'm in. One by one, the rest of the crew voiced their agreement, until Marcus found himself looking around at a crew unanimously ready to transform a simple rescue mission into something far larger, a direct challenge to a system of exploitation that had operated unchecked for generations. Gathering evidence proved nearly as dangerous as the firefights that had preceded it. They infiltrated shipping records hidden behind layers of corporate obfuscation, traced financial transactions disguised as legitimate trade, and carefully extracted testimony from survivors brave enough to speak, each piece slowly assembling into an undeniable, damning picture. The deeper they dug, the more apparent it became that this was not merely a Zephyrian problem, but a sector-wide system of complicity, officials on supposedly neutral worlds who had long looked the other way in exchange for trade concessions and political favors. When they finally had enough evidence to act, Marcus turned to Zara with a question that would define everything that followed. Once we release this, there's no going back. Krell and everyone connected to this network will see you as their single greatest threat. Are you prepared for what that means? Zara thought of the council chamber, where she'd first said no, of the dying mining platform where she'd nearly given up entirely, of every woman whose name now lived only in Celine's careful records, having paid the ultimate price for choices Zara herself had somehow survived to make. I've already lost everything once, she said quietly. I'm not afraid of losing it again, not if it means other women never have to face that same choice alone. Marcus nodded slowly, something like fierce pride flickering across his weathered features. Then let's make sure the whole galaxy hears it. What none of them yet realized was that releasing this evidence would not simply embarrass a corrupt elite. It would ignite a movement across dozens of worlds, transforming one exiled woman's fight for personal freedom into the spark of revolution none of them could fully control. The evidence detonated across the sector's networks like a long-overdue storm. Within hours of its release, carefully distributed simultaneously across independent news networks, government oversight committees, and underground activist channels to prevent any single power from suppressing it. The carefully constructed facade protecting Zephyrian high society's darkest secret began to crumble in full public view. Names long protected by wealth and influence were suddenly attached to documented evidence of disappearances, forced labor, and systematic violence against women who had dared to exercise even the smallest measure of personal choice. Krell Ashter's name sat near the very top of the list, his carefully cultivated reputation as a respected merchant lord collapsing overnight beneath irrefutable evidence of his role in the network's darkest operations. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted across Zephyrian colonies, led overwhelmingly by women who had spent their entire lives swallowing silent fury at a system designed to control them. For the first time in generations, public defiance was no longer an isolated, easily punished act. It was a movement too large, too widespread, too thoroughly documented to simply erase. Aboard the Iron Resolve, the crew watched the unfolding chaos with a complicated mixture of triumph and tension, fully aware that cornered, desperate men rarely surrender quietly. "Krell's not going down without trying to take you with him," Marcus warned Zara, as reports of increasingly aggressive bounty hunters flooded their intelligence networks. Desperate men make dangerous final moves. That final, desperate move came faster than anyone anticipated. Krell himself, abandoning all pretense of legal proceedings, hired the most lethal mercenary outfit in known space, the Vorkin Syndicate, offering them an almost unlimited bounty for Zara's death, no longer care about capture, no longer caring about consequences. He simply wanted her silence, permanently, before her continued survival could further unravel everything he'd spent his life building. The Vorkin Syndicate found them 3 days later, ambushing the Iron Resolve near the treacherous gravity wells of the Cashin Nebula, a location chosen deliberately to limit the freighter's evasive options. What followed was the most desperate battle of the entire ordeal. 3 heavily armed Syndicate cruisers against 1 battered cargo freighter and its small, fiercely loyal crew. Decks flew with a desperation born of pure survival instinct, weaving the Iron Resolve through the nebula's chaotic gravitational currents in maneuvers that should have torn the ship apart. Sasha and Tomas fought the defensive systems to their absolute limits, while Marcus coordinated the ship's increasingly battered resistance with the calm, unbreakable focus of a man who had simply decided, long ago, that he would rather die fighting than abandon someone under his protection. It was Zara, in the end, who turned the tide. Drawing on everything Celine had shared about the network's internal communications, Zara hijacked the Syndicate's command frequency mid-battle and broadcast something the mercenaries never expected. A direct, unedited transmission of Krell's own recorded confession, extracted during their earlier investigation, admitting his role in the deaths of dozens of women across multiple systems. "You're not being paid to enforce justice," Zara broadcast across every Syndicate channel, her voice steady despite the chaos raging around her. "You're being paid to silence the truth. The whole galaxy already knows what he did. Killing me won't undo that. It'll just make you complicit in everything that comes next. It was a gamble, a desperate, almost reckless one, but it worked. Mercenary contracts, however lucrative, rarely survive direct exposure to public scrutiny and the very real risk of being permanently associated with a crumbling criminal empire." One by one, the Syndicate cruisers broke off their attack, their commanders unwilling to stake their own reputations on a doomed, increasingly infamous cause. Krell Ashdor was arrested 4 days later, dragged from his private estate by his Empyrean authorities, suddenly eager to distance themselves from his collapsing influence, his vast fortune seized, his name forever attached to one of the most significant scandals in the sector's recent history. In the aftermath, as the Iron Resolve underwent long overdue repairs at a quiet shipyard far from the chaos they'd helped unleash, Zara stood on the observation deck beside Marcus, watching the stars drift past in the same patient, indifferent rhythm they always had. "It's strange," she said softly. "A few weeks ago, I was certain I was going to die alone on a dying mining platform, completely forgotten by the universe. Now there are women across a dozen worlds organizing, speaking out, demanding change, because I refused one marriage and happened to survive what came after." "You didn't just survive," Marcus said. "You chose to keep fighting, even when survival alone would have been enough for most people. That's the difference that actually changes things." Zara turned to study him. This quiet, steady man who had answered a dying woman's desperate signal not out of obligation, but out of an unshakable belief that no one deserved to be abandoned. "What happens now? For me, I have no homeworld anymore, no citizenship, no family willing to claim me." Marcus smiled, the expression softening the old scar along his jaw. "Now you have a ship full of people who already consider you family, whether you officially claim us back or not. The rest, homeworld, citizenship, whatever comes next, that's something you get to choose for yourself this time. No council, no arranged terms, just your own decision." For the first time since the night she refused Krell Ashdor in front of an entire ruling council, Zara felt something settle inside her chest. Not relief exactly, and not quite peace, but something close to both. The terrifying, exhilarating weight of a future entirely her own to shape. "Then I choose this," she said quietly, looking out at the stars stretching endlessly ahead of the iron resolve. "Whatever comes next, I choose this." Behind them, scattered across dozens of worlds, the movement her defiance had sparked continued to grow. Countless women finding, in her story, the courage to imagine a future where their own choices might finally belong to them alone. It was, perhaps, a small beginning in the grand scope of an entire galaxy. But every revolution, Marcus knew, began with exactly that. One person, refusing to accept the cage they'd been given and choosing instead to fly. The end.